Welcome to Zygor Guides, your source for the best and fastest way to level your characters in World of Warcraft and accomplish more in less time. Today we're diving into the returning Mists of Tirna Scithe, a dungeon from Shadowlands that many players enjoyed. Now, while this is a recent dungeon, new mechanics have been added, especially in the second half, so be sure to stick around until the end of the video. As usual, before we get into the dungeon, let's go over what you'll want to have in your group for the best chances of success. A Night Elf, a Tauren, a Druid, or an Herbalist. Having one of these in your group is critical. They'll allow you to open a skip at the start, give a stat boost in the first half, and activate 2 additional graveyard checkpoints in the second half of the dungeon. Crowd control. You're going to want to bring classes that can handle single target crowd control like Sap, Imprison, or Sleepwalk from Evokers. This will help you skip a group early on, and during the second boss fight, you'll need a crowd control ability to deal with an ad that chases and stuns team members. Lastly, you're going to want to make sure your group has at least 2, preferably 3 interrupts on short cooldowns. You'll need them in the first third of the dungeon, including the first boss, though kicks become less frequent later on. Also, if you want to follow along with our pulls in-game, make sure to check out the video description for the MDT string for the route we used and a useful weak aura that'll help you get through a maze later in the dungeon. Alright, now that we have our bases covered, let's get started. Before we even pull our first group, your Night Elf, Tauren, Druid, or Herbalist will interact with the root wall on the left to let us through. Moving on, hug the right wall, and you'll encounter 5 Drust Spike Claws. These small mobs leap to the furthest player, dealing massive damage and applying a bleed. You can use abilities like Ursol's Vortex to stop the first set of jumps, but after that, it's all about managing defensive cooldowns. Upon death, these mobs leave behind a swirly that applies a curse, increasing damage taken for 20 seconds. This affects both players and enemies, so it's common to pull this group with the next one to take advantage of the curse on the additional mobs. The next group includes 2 Drust Soul Cleavers, 1 Drust Harvester, and a Tiernan Villager. The Villager has a large frontal cone that the tank must direct, and it also channels Overgrowth on a player, inflicting high damage. When the channel finishes, the player is stunned inside of vines, so the group must work quickly to destroy the vines. Try your very best to be in melee range to help your group with this. The Soul Cleavers will buff themselves and deal heavy mixed tank damage. They also apply Soul Split to the tank, which must be dispelled. And the Harvester will chain Spirit Bolts with random targeting. Try to stop as many of these as you can. The Harvester also has an ability called Harvest Essence, which must be kicked or it'll likely kill your group by draining the life of every member and heal to full. Now we're gonna skip the next group, and the easiest way to do this is with Sap or Imprison, which prevents the mob from aggroing anything nearby. Right after the skip is a pull of 2 Soul Cleavers and 2 Harvesters. This can be a pretty tough pull, so make sure to coordinate interrupts and AoE stops to manage the damage. After this group falls, there's another root wall nearby that can be opened. You'll find light blue savory mushrooms in this area that can be interacted with for a 10% main stat boost for the next 10 minutes, which will definitely come in handy for the next pull. Now that we have our stat boost, we have one last pull before the first boss. 2 Drust Bowbreakers. These large mobs continuously spawn brambles under players that deal damage and slow movement. At half health, they channel an ability that deals significant group damage, so it's best to trigger both Bowbreakers channels at the same time and use defensives to survive the burst. Once the Bowbreakers are down, it's time for the first boss, Ingra and Droman. The first boss fight is a 2-phase encounter. You'll spend most of the time in phase 1, where Ingra has a massive health pool, but in phase 2, he takes 200% increased damage. Make sure to save your cooldowns for phase 2, as this is when you'll deal the most damage. In phase 1, Ingra will cast Spirit Bolt on random players. Interrupt as many of these as possible. Once per phase, Ingra will terrify the group with Repulsive Visage, forcing everyone to run away. Be sure to position yourself so that you don't run into the Tears of the Forest swirlies left behind from Droman's abilities. The tank will also need to position Ulfrin to handle Bewildering Pollen, a frontal cone that functions a lot like the Tiernan Villager's ability. If you take too long to bring Ulfrin to 20% health, Ingra will cast Embrace Darkness, applying a damage reduction to himself and dealing constant rot damage to the group. Push to phase 2 quickly to avoid this. If you reach phase 2 and Ingra is at 20% health or lower, focus him down to kill him before the damage reduction reapplies. Now, as you navigate the complexities of these challenging encounters, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer amount of mechanics to manage. If you've ever found yourself struggling to keep up with everything, from avoiding deadly abilities to mastering complex skips, you might be wondering if there's a better way to enhance your World of Warcraft experience. Well, there is. Meet Zygor, the ultimate guide add-on for World of Warcraft. Zygor isn't just a leveling guide, it's your personal in-game assistant, helping you tackle everything from dungeons to earning gold with ease. Whether you're leveling a new character, optimizing your gear, or strategizing for endgame content, Zygor has you covered with its step-by-step guides, dynamic quest tracking, and even automated gear suggestions. So, the next time you're staring down a tough pull or planning out your next dungeon run, why not let Zygor take the stress out of the equation? Click the link in the description and get access to Zygor today. Now, back to the video. Now, with Ingra and Droman down, the fog wall will clear, and your Night Elf, Tauren, Druid, or Herbalist can interact with the seed on the left to activate a graveyard checkpoint. The fog maze sends you into different trash packs each time. Pay attention to the symbols in the maze and identify the one with a unique attribute like a flower or circle to find the correct path. The maze features various mobs. Mistville defenders charge players with Expel and drop healing pools with Mist Ward. Mistville guardians use a magic damage tank buster, Anima Slash. Mistville stalkers leave high damage DOTs on players. Mistville stingers apply a dispellable DOT. Mistville shapers cast Bramblethorn Coat, which should be interrupted to avoid a shield and group-wide root. Mistville tenders cast Nourish the Forest, which heals mobs over time and should be interrupted. You'll also encounter one of 3 mini-bosses in the maze. First up is Night Blossom, who deals significant tank damage with Triple Bite, a poison that needs to be dispelled immediately. The second mini-boss is Gorgigullet, who leaps at players and uses poisonous secretions and Tongue Lash, both of which can be dodged. Lastly, there's the Matriarch, who casts a large frontal breath and drops a pool that heals herself. The tank must move her out of it so you can take her down quickly. Once you get through the maze, it's time for the second boss, Coller. Coller is all about her illusionary clone mechanic. At 70%, 40%, and 10% health, she summons 4 clones. Only one is real, and you must kill the correct clone based on the symbols you identified earlier in the maze. Coller will also cast Dodgeball. There's a blue arrow indicating where she's aiming. Make sure to move out of the way of these arrows to avoid damage. Coller will also cast Patty Cake, which targets the tank and must be interrupted or the tank will lose threat and become disoriented. Lastly, she summons an illusionary Vulpin that chases players. If it reaches anyone, they become frozen, and on higher difficulties, it just straight up kills you. So it's best to crowd control the Vulpin with abilities like Polymorph or Frost Nova. Successfully identify and kill the clone 3 times while handling the other mechanics to wrap up the maze of Mists of Tirna Scithe. After defeating Coller, you'll descend the waterfall. Make sure your Night Elf, Tauren, Druid, or Herbalist interacts with the seed at the bottom to enable the next graveyard checkpoint for the dungeon. Now, the first pull in this section includes a Spine Maw Staghorn and 2 Spine Maw Acid Gullets. Be prepared for their abilities as they can be dangerous if not managed properly. The Acid Gullets cast Volatile Acid, placing a heavy DOT on a random party member. This debuff also creates a circle around the affected player, causing a knockback to anyone who gets too close, so watch your positioning carefully. The Staghorns have 2 casts that need to be interrupted: Stimulate Resistance and Stimulate Regeneration. The first applies a large shield to a mob. The second provides a pulsing heal, prolonging the fight. Make sure that your group is coordinating kicks to prevent these from going off. The Staghorns also have a new ability in the War Within expansion called Acid Nova. This, unfortunately, cannot be interrupted, and it deals significant group-wide damage and applies a 12-second debuff that increases damage taken. These mobs also have the highest health pool of all the mobs here, and should be cleaved off of. After dealing with that pack, head left to the next pull, which consists of another Spine Maw Staghorn, a Spine Maw Gorger, and several Spine Maw larvae. The larvae are small mobs that leave behind pools of poison when they die, so be mindful of where you're standing to avoid any unnecessary damage. The Gorger will cast Acid Globule, creating a green swirly under a player. If you're hit by this, you'll experience a massive knockback. On higher levels, this can easily result in death, so stay aware and dodge these swirlies to survive. In this area, there's also a patrol of 2 Spine Maw Reavers. The one on the left is the leader, and if you crowd control it, both mobs will stop their patrol. Use this to your advantage if you want to skip this patrol, and make sure to refresh the crowd control as needed. Now, if you do end up pulling the Reavers, watch out for their leap attack, which deals significant damage and applies a heavy poison damage over time to the target. You'll need to dispel this DOT as quickly as possible, or the affected player will need heavy healing to survive. Next up is a pack with a Spine Maw Staghorn, 2 Acid Gullets, and a Gorger. Handle this pull the same way as the previous ones. Interrupt the Staghorn's casts, and be ready to dodge the Gorger's acid globules. Finally, you'll face a pull with another Gorger, an Acid Gullet, and several larvae. After this, you can choose to pull the next pack of 2 more Acid Gullets and 2 more Gorgers together, but be cautious. This pull can be pretty intense for your healer, so make sure that your group is prepared for the incoming damage. Now, while this pack doesn't introduce any new mechanics, managing the damage is key to surviving. Once you've cleared these packs, you'll be one step closer to the final boss, Trova. A key strategy here is to spread out, especially keeping distance from the tank. At 70% and 40% health, Trova runs to the center of the room and shields herself while casting Consumption. The group must break the shield and interrupt Consumption to end the phase. Acid Expulsion is a key mechanic where Trova shoots swirlies at you. The best strategy is to make small, tight movements to dodge these, avoiding any large movements until later in the fight when swirlies start to overwhelm the room. Trova will cast Coalescing Poison, creating a circle beneath her that deals heavy damage and pulls everyone in. When she does this, run away as fast as possible. This mechanic follows Mind Link, which binds the group to the tank. The tank should move away from the group before Coalescing Poison begins to avoid any heavy group damage. Trova will also summon 4 Gormling larvae, which fixate on players. The group must kill these quickly before they get out of hand. Remember to stay spread out during Trova's key mechanics and always prioritize dodging those swirlies. If you're pushing higher keys, communication and crowd control will be critical throughout this dungeon. With Trova down, you've successfully conquered Mists of Tirna Scithe. Congratulations on completing the dungeon. If you found this guide helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more dungeon and raid guides, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. Got a strategy of your own or a question about the dungeon? Drop a comment down below. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, keep leveling up and we'll see you in the next video. Happy adventuring.